Listen to me, Bigfoot is real and they are too human for us to ignore. And I know exactly why they are this human and why they stay hidden from us. I never thought I would be the kind of person to obsess over something most folks consider a myth. But after living alone in these mountains for over 15 years, hearing strange sounds echoing through the valleys at night, watching shadows move between the trees in ways that did not make sense, I became that person. I became obsessed with finding Bigfoot. Not for fame or money or to prove anything to anyone else. I just needed to know if what I was hearing, what I was feeling in my gut every time I walked through those woods was real. The sound started maybe a year after I moved up here. Low howls that did not match any animal I knew. Sometimes they echoed across the valley in the middle of the night, waking me from deep sleep with my heart pounding. Other times I would hear them while hiking during the day, distant but unmistakable, coming from somewhere deep in the forest where no trails existed. I would freeze in my tracks and listen hard, trying to pinpoint the direction, but they always seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The sound would bounce off the valley walls and tree trunks until it surrounded me completely, echoing and re-echoing until I could not tell which direction was the source. Sometimes the howls would start low and rise to a high pitch that made my skin crawl. Other times they were just a steady low moan that seemed to go on forever, vibrating through the air itself. The shadows were even harder to explain away with logic. Shapes that moved wrong through my peripheral vision, catching my eye but vanishing when I turned to look directly. Too tall to be deer, way too tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet. Too upright to be bears, moving on 2 legs with a smooth gait that bears do not have. They would disappear behind massive tree trunks before I could focus my eyes properly on where they had been, leaving me questioning whether I had seen anything at all or if my mind was playing tricks on me after too long alone. At first I told myself it had to be bears. We have healthy black bear populations up here, and they can stand on their hind legs when they want to get a better view or reach something high up in the trees. But bears do not move the way those shadows moved. Bears lumber and sway when they walk upright, awkward, and unbalanced. These shadows move with a smooth, confident stride that looked natural and practiced, like something that walked upright all the time. And bears definitely do not make sounds like the ones I was hearing echoing through the night air. Deep in my gut, below the level of rational thought, I knew something else was out there sharing these mountains with me. Something I could not explain away with logical thinking or scientific reasoning. The thing is, I spent years looking for proof of what I knew was there. Years following advice from online forums where people shared their own experiences and theories about where to look and what signs to watch for when searching for Bigfoot. Footprints near water sources where they might drink. Tree structures that seemed deliberately made by something with intelligence. Areas where wildlife went completely silent for no apparent reason. I hiked miles and miles through wilderness so thick you could barely see 10 feet ahead of you, following faint game trails and rocky creek beds and high ridge lines, searching desperately for any sign of what might be making those sounds that haunted my nights. I set up trail cameras in spots that seemed promising based on what I had learned from others, near clear water sources where Bigfoot might come to drink, along high ridge lines where it might travel to stay above the dense forest below, in natural clearings where animals would pass through on their way between feeding areas. I studied every piece of footage I could find online, spending hours and hours watching videos that other people had uploaded claiming to show Bigfoot. Most of them were obviously fake once you knew what to look for and studied them carefully. People in cheap gorilla suits stumbling through backyards at night pretending to be shocked. Blurry, shaky videos of bears standing upright that people swore on their lives were Bigfoot. computer-generated animations trying desperately to pass as authentic encounters with elaborate backstories that did not hold up to any scrutiny. I learned to spot the fakes pretty quickly after watching enough of them and knowing what details to examine. The movement was wrong in subtle but obvious ways once you knew. The proportions did not make biological sense when you really looked. The video quality was suspiciously poor in ways that conveniently hid obvious problems with the costume or the editing. But some of the footage, the small percentage that looked genuinely authentic to my increasingly trained eye, it always showed Bigfoot as this aggressive, dangerous monster. Threatening stance with shoulders hunched forward, territorial behavior, dangerous movements that suggested it would attack without hesitation if given the chance. People in the comment sections would analyze these videos endlessly, going frame by frame, looking for tiny details to debate. They would say things like, "You can clearly see the rage burning in its eyes if you look at frame 24/7, or that Bigfoot looked like it wanted to rip that person apart and barely controlled itself, or that the creature was clearly hunting whoever was filming and they were incredibly lucky to escape with their life." There were long, passionate debates that went on for pages about whether Bigfoot was primarily a predator, whether it ate mostly meat or mostly plants, whether it would attack humans unprovoked if it felt its territory was being threatened. The general consensus across most forums and websites seemed to be that these creatures were extremely dangerous and best avoided entirely at all costs. Some people advocated shooting on sight if you ever encountered one in the woods. Better to kill it than risk it killing you, they would argue back and forth. Others said to always carry large caliber firearms into the wilderness, specifically in case you ran into Bigfoot and needed to defend yourself. The fear was real and widespread among people who actually believed these creatures existed out there. That widespread fear never sat right with me somehow. Something about the way people described these creatures as mindless, aggressive monsters felt fundamentally wrong, like we were missing something crucial about their true nature. But I did not have anything else to go on except those online videos and forum discussions from people I had never met. I had never seen a Bigfoot myself despite all my searching and camera placement. All I had were those strange sounds that might be wind and fleeting shadows that might be imagination playing tricks after too many years living completely alone in these remote mountains. For months and months, I checked those trail cameras every single week without fail, hiking out to each location regardless of weather conditions. I would swap out the memory cards, bring them home, review the footage carefully on my laptop, looking for anything unusual. Nothing useful ever showed up on any of them. Just deer passing through at dusk, their eyes reflecting bright green in the infrared light of the camera. The occasional bear investigating the camera itself with its nose, leaving smudges and condensation on the protective lens. Once a mountain lion walked right past one of my cameras at 3 a.m, and seeing that beautiful and dangerous animal so close to where I hiked made me seriously rethink where I was placing my equipment. I moved that particular camera the very next week to a location I considered much safer, further from any game trails that large predators might use regularly for hunting. I was about ready to give up entirely on this whole search that had consumed years of my life. Maybe those sounds really were just wind whistling through the valleys in strange ways that created unusual echoes. Maybe the mountains played acoustic tricks that made normal animal calls seem unusual and otherworldly to my ears. Maybe I was just hearing things that were not really there after too many years of isolation and solitude. My mind creating mysteries where none actually existed in reality. Maybe those shadows I kept glimpsing were nothing more than my imagination playing tricks after too many nights alone with only my thoughts and memories for company. The loneliness of mountain life can do strange things to your mind over time. I know that from experience. I had accepted it as part of the trade-off for living somewhere so remote, so completely far from other people and the noise and chaos of civilization. The silence can be both peaceful and maddening depending on the day and your state of mind. Then I tried something different, something I had read about on one of those forums, but never actually attempted myself because it seemed too simple to possibly work. There is a spot about 3 miles from my cabin as the crow flies, deep in the forest where the trees grow so close together that even at midday it feels like twilight. Old growth pines that have been standing for hundreds of years, maybe even longer than that. Their thick branches creating an interlocking canopy so dense that very little sunlight manages to reach the ground far below. The ground there is soft and springy under your feet, covered in thick, bright green moss, and decades worth of fallen pine needles that have built up into a natural carpet several inches deep in places. Every step you take makes almost no sound at all, absorbed completely by all that slowly decomposing organic material. It is a remarkably quiet place, the kind of quiet that feels almost heavy on your ears after a while. Peaceful in a way that makes you want to whisper even when no one else is around within miles to hear you speak. I had walked past that particular spot dozens of times over the years on my longer hikes through the area. Something about it always felt different from the rest of the forest surrounding my cabin, though I could never quite put my finger on why. The air seemed heavier there somehow, more still and watchful and attentive, more aware, if that makes any sense at all. I cannot explain it better than that even now. It just felt like a place where something important might happen someday, like the forest itself was holding its breath and waiting patiently for something specific to occur. So I decided to try leaving food offerings there instead of just setting up another camera to capture more endless footage of deer and bears and nothing else useful. I brought dried meat I had made myself from a deer I hunted the previous fall, cutting the venison into long strips and smoking it slowly over hickory wood until it was preserved well enough to last for months without any refrigeration. Berries I had picked during the summer and preserved carefully in mason jars with just a bit of sugar to help them keep. Nuts I had gathered from the forest floor in autumn, black walnuts and hickory nuts still in their hard protective outer shells. Nothing fancy or expensive or hard to obtain, just simple, honest food that any animal or creature living in these woods might want to eat. I set up a camera overlooking the spot very carefully, angling it just right to capture as much of the small clearing as possible, where I placed the food on a large flat rock. I used heavy-duty zip ties to attach the camera securely to a tree trunk about chest height, making absolutely sure the lens was not blocked by any branches or leaves that might blow in front of it during wind. I checked the battery level twice to make completely sure it would last for at least 2 full weeks of continuous recording. Made sure the memory card was completely empty and had plenty of space to record continuously for days and days if needed. Then I hiked back home through the fading afternoon light as the sun dropped behind the western mountains, not expecting much of anything to come from this particular attempt. By that point, I had set up so many cameras in so many different locations across these mountains that I had stopped allowing myself to get my hopes up about finding anything. Every disappointment had taught me not to expect positive results, just to do the work and see what happened. 2 weeks later, I went back to check the camera during my regular weekly rounds of all my camera locations spread throughout the area. The hike out there had become completely familiar by then, almost meditative in its repetition and routine. I could have walked that particular path with my eyes closed if I needed to, my feet knowing every root and rock along the way. The food was gone when I arrived at the clearing, which was not surprising in the least to me. Plenty of animals could have taken it easily enough. Bears searching desperately for easy calories before winter set in hard. raccoons with their clever little hands that can open almost anything. Even ravens are smart enough and strong enough to carry off good-sized pieces of dried meat in their powerful beaks. I retrieved the camera from the tree where I had mounted it and hiked back home at a steady pace before opening it and reviewing the footage, not wanting to be disappointed out in the woods if there was nothing useful captured on the card. My hands were actually shaking slightly as I pulled out the memory card and loaded it onto my laptop back at the cabin. I had felt the same nervous excitement before checking cameras and been let down every single time without exception. Still, something felt different about this one somehow. Some instinct I could not name or explain told me clearly that this time might actually be different from all the others. I made myself a hot cup of coffee, sat down at my desk by the window overlooking the valley below, and started reviewing the footage with my finger hovering over the fast-forward button. I fast-forwarded through hours of absolutely nothing at all happening, just the wind moving branches in repetitive patterns that created shifting shadows on the forest floor. A gray squirrel appeared around hour 6 of the recording, investigating the food with its characteristic quick, jerky movements before grabbing a nut in its mouth and darting away into the thick underbrush. More hours of nothing after that. Just the slow, predictable movement of sunlight across the clearing as the day progressed steadily toward evening and then complete darkness. I was about ready to give up and delete the whole file to free up hard drive space. Just another failed attempt in a long series of failures. Then the footage jumped forward to dawn of the second day. That gray, uncertain light just before sunrise when the world exists in shades of blue and black, when shadows are long and deep and everything looks slightly unreal and dreamlike. At first I almost missed it entirely. Just a large shape at the very edge of the frame, barely visible against the dark background of trees in the low light. Then it moved forward into full view, stepping into the clearing with careful, deliberate steps that showed clear intention, and my heart actually stopped beating for a moment. Bigfoot stood there directly in my camera frame, as real and solid as anything I had ever seen in my entire life. There was absolutely no mistaking what I was looking at on that screen. This was not a bear standing temporarily on its hind legs to get a better view of something. Not a person in a realistic costume playing some kind of elaborate prank in the middle of nowhere for no audience. Not a trick of light and shadow or a smudge on the camera lens or some kind of technical glitch in the recording. This was something real and alive and massive, walking toward my offering with purposeful steps that showed clear intention and environmental awareness. I froze the frame and just stared at my computer screen for, I do not know how long, minutes certainly, maybe much longer than that. Time seemed to stop having any meaning in that moment. This enormous creature stood easily 8 or 9 feet tall when fully upright, covered head to toe in reddish-brown hair that seemed to catch what little light was available in the pre-dawn darkness, almost glowing in the dim gray light. The hair looked thick and coarse, maybe 4 to 6 inches long in most places, longer around the shoulders and back. I could actually see the powerful muscles moving beneath that thick hair as Bigfoot walked forward, rippling under the skin with each movement, controlled and deliberate and purposeful. Could see the individual strands of hair moving with each step, swaying slightly, catching the faint, gray morning light filtering down through the trees overhead. The legs were long and muscular, built for covering distance. The arms swung naturally at its sides as it walked, not dragging or held stiffly. This was not some grainy, impossible-to-make-out blob like 90% of the footage circulating online in forums and videos. This was clear enough to see real, meaningful detail. This was undeniably real, undeniably actually there in that clearing. but something felt wrong about what I was seeing, wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. I started the footage playing again with trembling fingers and watched Bigfoot approach the offering I had left on the flat rock. I studied every single detail I could possibly make out in the recording. This Bigfoot did not look like the monster from all those online descriptions I had read. Its movement seemed too deliberate, too careful, almost thoughtful in a way that unsettled me. Each step was placed carefully and deliberately, with obvious thought behind the movement. The face, even covered in all that thick hair, had this unsettling familiarity to it that I could not shake. Its eyes showed intelligence, real deep intelligence, not the blank stare of an animal acting purely on instinct. The hands were massive but moved with precision when handling the food, fingers working in ways that seemed too sophisticated for a wild creature. The posture was upright and confident, almost human-like in how Bigfoot stood there examining my offering. I spent that entire night rewatching the footage over and over compulsively. I could not sleep at all, could not even think about sleeping, could not look away from that computer screen. I must have watched the full sequence hundreds of times, pausing at different moments to study details, trying to see every possible thing. Something about this Bigfoot looking too human would not leave my mind, no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it away with logic and reason. It disturbed me deeply. The next morning, I could barely function from complete lack of sleep. I had not slept at all the entire night. My mind kept replaying that footage on an endless loop. I made strong coffee and sat on my porch watching the sun rise slowly over the eastern mountains, trying to decide what to do next. Part of me wanted to rush back out to that spot immediately to leave more food. Part of me was genuinely terrified of what another encounter might reveal about these creatures that should not exist. Eventually, I gathered my supplies together and hiked back out to the offering site through the morning forest. The walk felt completely different now than it had before. Before, it had just been another routine hike through familiar territory I knew well. Now I knew with absolute certainty that something was watching these woods, something intelligent and aware, something that might be watching me right now as I walked along the trail between the trees. I left more food on the same rock, more dried meat from my stores, some dried fish I had smoked, fresh berries. I repositioned the camera to get a better angle, trying to capture more of the clearing. Then I hiked home, my mind racing with questions I could not answer. A week later, I checked the footage again with nervous anticipation. Bigfoot had returned exactly as I hoped. Same creature without any doubt, I could tell by distinctive features. And those same careful, deliberate movements. That same clear intelligence in how it approached the food. I kept this pattern up for weeks and weeks that turned into months. I returned week after week without fail, creating a pattern and routine that became part of my life. Every single week, I would hike out to the spot on the same day, collect the camera and memory card, review the footage carefully at home on my laptop for hours, and return the next day with fresh supplies carefully chosen. Bigfoot came back regularly and consistently, like it was also following a routine and schedule. Not every single time I left food, maybe 3 out of every 4 times, but often enough that I could predict when it might appear. Always when I was not present at the site, always in those early morning hours. I never saw the creature in person during these trips, only on the recordings afterward when I reviewed them. Sometimes I would arrive at the clearing and feel like I had just missed it, like Bigfoot had been there minutes before and left when it heard me coming through the forest. The food would still be scattered around, not all of it taken, like the meal had been interrupted. I started bringing better quality food from my own supplies. Dried venison I had been saving for myself through the winter, smoked salmon, fresh fruit when I could get it. I told myself this was purely about observation, about gathering data. But really, I was forming a connection. Each recording showed the same Bigfoot, always alone, never with others. I began documenting absolutely everything in a thick notebook. Behavior patterns, times of visits, what food Bigfoot seemed to prefer. I noticed it would examine food carefully before eating, not just grabbing and devouring like a hungry animal would do. The creature would pick up each item, turn it over in those massive hands, maybe smell it, definitely look at it closely before deciding whether to eat it or set it aside. Sometimes it would take a small bite first, chewing slowly, seeming to taste it before eating more. This showed a level of caution and intelligence that amazed me every time I watched it. The creature would sometimes sit near the offering site after eating, seemingly relaxed and at ease in that clearing. It would sit with its back against the large boulder at the edge, legs stretched out in front, just resting there for 10 or 15 minutes. Its breathing would be visible in the cool morning air, creating small puffs of condensation with each breath. During these resting periods, it would look around the forest with what seemed like appreciation or contentment, taking in its surroundings with no apparent fear or anxiety. One recording showed Bigfoot touching the bark of trees in a way that struck me as almost tender, almost gentle, like it was inspecting the texture with genuine curiosity and interest. It would run those massive fingers slowly along the rough bark, feeling the ridges and grooves, sometimes picking at loose pieces with its fingernails. That gesture was so inherently human, so familiar in its curiosity, it made my chest feel tight with emotion I could not quite name. The movement patterns I observed resembled upright walking humans far more than apes moving through trees. The way Bigfoot moved through the forest became clearer as I gathered more footage. It walked upright almost exclusively. Its stride was long and efficient. From measurements I took using reference points, I estimated the creature stood somewhere between 8 and 9 feet tall based on stride length. But the body proportions surprised me greatly and did not match expectations at all. Long legs, very long in proportion to the torso, longer than any ape I had ever seen pictures of. The arms looked shorter than I expected based on gorilla proportions, though still definitely longer than human arms would be on a body that size. The shoulders were massive, incredibly broad, broader than seemed possible. But the hips were narrower in comparison, creating an almost triangular shape to the upper body. The face structure, though covered in that reddish-brown hair that was maybe 4 inches long, had a prominent brow ridge that stuck out noticeably, but also defined cheekbones underneath that you could see clearly in the better footage when the light hit right. The nose was broad and flat. The mouth area, when Bigfoot opened it to eat, showed teeth that looked more human than ape-like, though I could not see clearly enough to be certain about details. The recordings reminded me of credible footage I had studied online before all this started. The Patterson-Gimlin film showed a similar build and gait, that same long stride and upright posture. Other recordings I had thought were authentic showed the same deliberate, cautious behavior I was witnessing. I started wondering if Bigfoot might be a subspecies of Homo sapiens, or maybe a close evolutionary cousin, something parallel that developed alongside humans. The intelligence level seemed higher than anyone suspected, way higher than any ape. I spent months analyzing that growing collection of footage, taking more and more detailed notes in my notebook. I noticed Bigfoot never damaged the surrounding area when it visited. It moved carefully through the brush, stepping over fallen logs instead of crashing through them. It left minimal trace of its presence beyond occasional footprints pressed into soft patches of ground. Those footprints measured over 16 inches long when I found them and measured carefully. Each toe was visible in the impressions spread wide. The prints were deeply impressed in the soil, showing the enormous weight of the creature. Patterns started emerging clearly in the data I collected. I began seeing patterns in the visits. Bigfoot visited every 4 or 5 days like clockwork, always in the early morning hours, just as dawn was breaking. I started leaving offerings on a predictable schedule to match these established visits. But I understood something crucial even as I learned more. This creature was feral despite all its human-like qualities, wild and untamed. It had lived its entire life in these mountains. The size and strength meant it could easily harm or kill me if it felt threatened. I knew approaching directly would be extremely dangerous. I needed to be extremely careful about my next steps. Still, after 6 full months of this routine, I decided to take a bigger risk. I wanted desperately to see Bigfoot in person, not just on camera recordings. I spent 2 weeks preparing carefully for this, gathering supplies, planning out the safest possible camp location I could find. I chose a spot about 200 yards from the offering site, on slightly elevated ground with good sight lines in multiple directions so I could see anything approaching. I brought minimal gear to reduce my presence: small tent, sleeping bag, water, food for myself, flashlight, basic survival equipment only. I also brought my rifle, but not for Bigfoot. I knew a gun would do little against a creature this size except make it angry. The rifle was for other wildlife that might pose a threat. Bears and mountain lions sometimes move through this area at night. I told myself this was just for observation, nothing more than that. I left an offering at the usual spot before setting up my camp as darkness started to fall. I built a small campfire and settled in for what I knew would be a very long night of waiting and watching. The first few hours passed quietly enough. Normal forest sounds surrounded me, birds calling to each other as they settled in for the night, small animals rustling through the underbrush. Around 10 at night, the night birds stopped calling entirely. By 11 at night, even the insects had gone completely silent. The forest became eerily still, like it was holding its breath, like everything else out there knew something I did not. Midnight approached slowly. I sat by my campfire, which had burned down to mostly glowing coals by then, every sense on high alert. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. Then I heard it clearly. A soft rustling of leaves off to my left side. Not the wind blowing through branches. Too deliberate, too careful, too purposeful. Something large was moving through the underbrush very slowly and carefully. It stopped moving entirely, then moved again, this time from a completely different direction. Behind me now. Whatever was out there had been circling my position slowly, and I realized with creeping dread that it had probably been watching me silently for some time already. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I forced myself to stay calm and not panic. Panicking would make the situation so much worse and more dangerous. I grabbed a pack of jerky from my supplies, the entire pound of dried meat I had brought. Slowly, moving as carefully as I possibly could to avoid startling whatever was out there in the darkness, I stood up from my seat by the dying fire. I placed the jerky at the edge of the campfire light where it would be clearly visible, and then backed away slowly toward my tent. The rustling stopped completely. Total silence surrounded me, pressing in from all sides. I waited, barely breathing, eyes scanning the dark tree line desperately for any sign of movement. Then I saw it clearly. Movement in the deep shadows just beyond the firelight. A massive shape emerged slowly from the darkness between the trees. Bigfoot stepped into the dim glow of my campfire, and I stopped breathing altogether. It was even more enormous in person than the footage had suggested. Easily 8.5 feet tall, with shoulders so incredibly broad they blocked out the trees behind it entirely. Covered in thick, reddish-brown hair that was matted in places from weather and living rough outdoors. Then the smell hit me like a physical force, almost knocking me backward a step. musky and earthy and wild and overwhelming, filling my nose and throat. Not exactly unpleasant, not like rotting meat or waste, but overwhelmingly strong and primal in a way I had never experienced before. The kind of smell that comes from living entirely outdoors for an entire lifetime without shelter or washing. The smell of fur and skin and the forest itself all mixed together. It was the smell of something truly wild, something that had never known walls or roofs or any kind of human comfort. The creature's face caught the flickering firelight, and my breath caught hard in my chest, trapped there. Those eyes reflected amber gold in the dancing flames, watching me with an intensity that made every hair on my skin prickle and stand up. The face was shockingly expressive in ways I did not expect at all, ways that unsettled me deeply. It showed clear, unmistakable intelligence and awareness. This was not an animal looking at me with simple awareness or instinct. This was something else, something more complex, assessing me with the same kind of conscious awareness I was using to assess it, meeting my gaze with understanding. Bigfoot moved forward toward the jerky with surprising grace for something so impossibly large. Each step was deliberate and controlled, not lumbering or clumsy at all like I expected. It reached down and picked up the package of jerky with careful fingers. Those massive hands moved with precision and control. Bigfoot examined the package briefly, turning it over in those huge hands, then tore the package open easily. The plastic wrapper made a loud crinkling sound that echoed in the silent forest. Then Bigfoot looked directly at me across the campfire, making direct eye contact. The expression on that face was unmistakable and clear as day. It was a warning, obvious even without words being spoken. The message was crystal clear. Do not try anything. Stay where you are. Do not make me regret this. We maintained direct eye contact for several long seconds that felt like an eternity. My legs felt like they might give out completely beneath me. Then Bigfoot turned calmly and walked back into the darkness, disappearing into the forest as quietly as it had appeared. I stood frozen for what must have been long minutes after it left, processing what just happened. I spent the rest of that night wide awake, my mind racing through every detail. I replayed every second of the encounter in my head over and over, the way Bigfoot moved. Too human, too aware and conscious. The intelligence in those eyes was undeniable and impossible to dismiss. This was not just a smart animal acting on advanced instinct. This was something more, something that thought and reasoned. The creature had understood the offering, had understood that my retreat toward the tent meant peace and safety. It had communicated a clear warning to me without using words, through facial expression and body language alone. The sophistication of that body language, the controlled and purposeful movements, the way those massive hands had manipulated the packaging with ease and almost human dexterity. The face structure beneath all that hair seemed more human than ape when I really thought about it. The proportions, the expressions, the awareness and consciousness behind those eyes. I realized this creature was probably closer to humans than anyone knew or suspected. I thought about evolutionary biology, about the Homo sapiens family tree and all the branches. Bigfoot could be a cousin species, parallel evolution, or an ancient relative. Whatever it was, it possessed consciousness and awareness, and maybe even some form of culture. I continued leaving offerings over the following months, maintaining the routine we had established. I caught glimpses of Bigfoot from a distance several more times during my hikes. Once I saw it crossing a ridgeline at sunset, its silhouette unmistakable against the orange sky. Another time I spotted it drinking from a creek about 300 yards away, crouched down with one massive hand in the water. I never approached closer than that campfire encounter had been. A boundary had been established that night, and I respected it completely and absolutely. I used binoculars to observe from safe distances when I spotted it. I watched Bigfoot move through the forest with practiced ease, stepping carefully around obstacles, choosing paths intelligently. I saw it eating berries once, selecting specific plants while carefully avoiding others. That demonstrated real knowledge of the environment, understanding of what was edible and what was poisonous, not just trial and error learning, but actual knowledge. Once I observed it examining a broken branch on a large tree, seeming to assess the damage carefully and thoughtfully. It ran those massive fingers along the break, looked up at where the branch had snapped off high above, then moved on after studying it. Another sighting showed it watching a deer herd from cover one morning. Not hunting them or stalking them, just watching, curious in the same way I was curious about Bigfoot. I realized Bigfoot was studying its environment constantly, always learning and observing. I built a mental map of its territory from these observations over time. The range seemed to cover at least 20 square miles of dense forest, maybe more. Bigfoot seemed to follow seasonal patterns, moving with food sources as they became available throughout the year. After a full year of careful observations and meticulous documentation, I became absolutely certain of my conclusion beyond any shadow of doubt. Bigfoot was an evolutionary cousin to humans, a member of our family tree. No doubt remained in my mind whatsoever about this. It shared too many characteristics, too many specific traits and behaviors for this to be convergent evolution or simple coincidence or my imagination. The intelligence I had witnessed repeatedly was undeniable. The tool use I had seen when I watched it using a long stick to dig in soft ground once, probing for roots or grubs with clear purpose. The social awareness demonstrated in how it communicated that warning to me that night by the campfire, reading my body language and responding appropriately. The way it moved through its environment with understanding and intent, the way it seemed to think through problems before acting, the way it communicated complex ideas without spoken language through gesture and expression. This was clearly a member of the Homo genus, not just another primate species like gorillas or chimpanzees. This was something that walked upright as its primary form of locomotion, something that used tools, even simple ones, something that showed self-awareness and consciousness, and possibly even culture passed down through generations. But this certainty brought a much darker realization with it that kept me awake at night. I started thinking seriously about what would happen when the world finally acknowledged that Bigfoot exists, when someone gets better footage than mine, when someone captures one alive or kills one and brings back the body. I thought about how humans treat chimpanzees today in our modern world. Despite being our closest living relatives genetically, sharing over 98% of our DNA, chimps have no legal rights, no real protection under law in most places. They get subjected to painful experiments in research laboratories for decades. They get locked in concrete and steel cages in zoos for public entertainment, performing tricks for treats. They get degraded and used and treated as objects and property rather than beings with feelings and consciousness and family bonds. They get taken from their mothers as infants to be raised by humans for the pet trade. They get used in entertainment, dressed in clothes, and made to perform unnatural behaviors. When they grow too large and strong to handle safely, they get abandoned to sanctuaries or worse. All of this happens to beings that can learn sign language, that mourn their dead, that form lifelong friendships, and remember friends and family for decades. Bigfoot would face the same fate, probably even worse because of their size and strength, making them seem more dangerous and threatening. They would be hunted down systematically and captured using tranquilizer darts and traps. studied and dissected in government and university labs. Some would be killed for trophies by wealthy people who wanted to be the first to take one down and mount the head on their wall. Others would be locked in specialized facilities built specifically to contain them, trapped behind bars and reinforced glass, poked and prodded by researchers wanting to study every aspect of their biology and behavior. Teams of scientists would examine them, take blood samples, run tests, publish papers about their findings in prestigious journals. Their intelligence and awareness would make that captivity even crueler than it would be for a regular animal without consciousness. They would understand fully what was happening to them, comprehend the loss of freedom. They would know they were prisoners, stripped of everything natural to them, torn away from their forest home and their way of life. They would know they were being displayed and studied like objects in a museum. They would comprehend their loss of freedom and autonomy in ways that would make the suffering so much worse than simple physical captivity, a mental and emotional torture that would never end. I began questioning seriously whether I should share what I had learned with anyone. I had the footage saved on my hard drives. I had detailed notes spanning months of observations in my notebooks. I had my own eyewitness account from that night by the campfire. I could prove Bigfoot existed beyond any reasonable doubt. I could change scientific understanding of human evolution and what other species might exist alongside us. But at what cost to the creatures themselves? What would happen to them? They had survived this long by staying hidden, by being careful and cautious, by avoiding human contact whenever possible. Revealing them would destroy their ability to live freely in these mountains. Every day, more of their habitat gets cut down for development and logging. Every year, more hikers and campers push deeper into wilderness that used to be truly remote and untouched. If people knew Bigfoot was real, if they knew where to look and what signs to watch for, these creatures would have nowhere left to hide from us. I started erasing older footage from my hard drives, keeping only a few recordings for myself alone. I stopped taking detailed notes in my notebook. I burned most of what I had written, watching the pages curl and blacken in my fireplace. I realized my obsession had been selfish from the very start. I had wanted to find Bigfoot for myself, for the personal satisfaction of knowing I was right all along about what was out there. I never seriously considered what finding them and revealing them might mean for their survival as a species. Understanding came slowly over weeks and months, but it came eventually. Some mysteries should stay mysteries for good reason. Some beings deserve to remain unknown, protected by doubt and disbelief and scientific skepticism. Final reflections. I still live in my mountain cabin today, the same one I've called home for over 15 years now. I still see Bigfoot occasionally from a distance, always respectfully far away, maybe once every few months if I am lucky. We have developed a mutual respect over the long years, a careful distance that works well for both of us, an unspoken agreement that keeps us both safe. Sometimes I leave offerings when it feels right, not on any predictable schedule anymore, just when the mood strikes me or when I have something particularly good. The food always disappears within a day or two, taken in the night while I sleep in my cabin. Sometimes I find offerings left in return on my porch in the early morning, gifts that were not there when I went to bed. Interesting rocks placed carefully by my door in small arrangements, smooth river stones or crystals that catch the light. Shed deer antlers leaning against my cabin wall, massive racks that must have taken effort to carry. Feathers from birds I cannot identify arranged in deliberate patterns on my steps, geometric designs that show clear intention. I believe this is Bigfoot's way of reciprocating, of showing appreciation or acknowledgement of our unspoken agreement and mutual respect. These small, quiet exchanges feel more valuable to me than any scientific proof could ever be worth. They are personal and real and mean something profound that would be completely lost if this became public knowledge, reduced to data points in a research paper. They represent a relationship, a connection between two intelligent beings who have learned to coexist in these mountains. I stopped checking online forums years ago, stopped reading the endless debates and arguments. I do not follow Bigfoot news anymore or read the latest theories people post. I do not need validation from others or recognition for what I have discovered. I know what I saw with my own eyes that night by the campfire. I know what they are in my bones and in my soul. I carry the weight of that knowledge alone, and I have made my peace with it over the years. Their survival depends entirely on remaining undiscovered, on staying hidden in these deep forests where development and logging has not yet reached them. Every time I see one from a distance through my binoculars during my hikes, usually just a glimpse of movement or a silhouette against the sky, I feel this deep mixture of joy and profound sadness. Joy at knowing they still exist, free and wild, that they are still able to live as they always have for thousands of years. Sadness knowing exactly how humanity would treat them if they were discovered and revealed to the world through video or a captured specimen. I have made my choice and I will stick to it. I will never share the full truth of what I know with anyone. Some questions do not need answers. Some beings do not need to be found by us. Bigfoot is too human in all the ways that matter. The way it thinks and reasons, the way it understands cause and effect, the emotions I saw clearly in those amber eyes by firelight that night. That is exactly why the world cannot know about them. Because if people understood how human these creatures really are, how close to us they are, it would not save them from harm. It would make their captivity and study even more justified in the minds of researchers and governments and universities. They would say we need to understand our evolutionary cousins for the advancement of science and human knowledge. They would say the scientific value outweighs any ethical concerns about their treatment or welfare. They would build specialized facilities with reinforced concrete walls and create long-term research programs with government funding and write countless academic papers for journals. And Bigfoot would go from free beings living in harmony with these ancient mountains to specimens locked behind reinforced glass walls and steel bars, studied and documented and poked and prodded with needles and instruments until there was nothing left to learn and nowhere left for them to go in this world that belongs to us now. So I keep my silence and guard this secret with my life. I live my simple, quiet life in these mountains alone with my thoughts. I respect the boundary that was established that night by the campfire between us, that mutual understanding. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the forest is completely still and silent, I like to think Bigfoot knows somehow that I am keeping the secret safe, that it understands in whatever way its complex mind works, that I chose to protect them rather than expose them to the world for fame or money or scientific recognition. That choice is worth more to me than fame or recognition or being known as the person who proved Bigfoot exists, more than proof or scientific validation or having my name in textbooks, more than anything the world could possibly offer me for revealing what I know to be true. Because in the end, some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved for everyone's sake, for the protection of those who cannot protect themselves from us. And some beings, especially ones too human for their own good in this modern world of ours, are meant to stay hidden forever in the deep, wild places where we cannot easily reach them, living their lives in peace as they have for countless generations before us. For more interesting stories, check this out.